That's really all.
At 4:30 p.m. This is Miranda. This is Sam. Have a fantastic Friday.
Fantastic Friday. All right, guys. Today and for most of next week, we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. Something that you probably learned about before to some extent. Hopefully, we'll kind of flesh that out a little bit, build off of what you already know. Pretty lengthy PowerPoint. Probably, if we go straight through with it, probably last until Wednesday. But I'll probably mix it up, here and there. So might go through the entire week. That being said, I got some stuff that goes with it, some videos. We may look at some documents, stuff like that. So it shouldn't be just straight lecture the whole time, but there's going to be a decent amount. Definitely need to have some PowerPoint notes in your notebook. May or may not be the last thing you need for this notebook check. I'm still kind of planning that next week based on how everything flows. But I am planning to tentatively have our first notebook check of the 6 weeks next Friday. So you got a week's notice. What we have up on the board is what you need. We may add one more or two more things to it, but right now we've got our American, French, and Haitian Revolution cause and effect charts. We have the Latin American revolutions and European nationalism vocab we did just the other day. And of course, notes over the Industrial Revolution. Again, with our PowerPoint notes, just a reminder, you don't ever have to write every single thing. That can be just way too much. But, I do need to see some decent amount of note taking, some decent effort there. Typically, if it's something that I write in red, it's indicative of, hey, this is valuable stuff. So that's kind of where we're going. Other news and notes. Right now, there are 3 assignments in the grade book. All of which are past due at this point if you haven't turned them in, but you can still turn them in. You've got your semester exam review, you've got your document analysis assignment, and you have the SAQ that you were supposed to get in last night. If you're missing any of those things, please get them in as soon as possible. That way your grade can improve. Plus, none of them are like super hard. You don't want to get zeros on the easy stuff. I'm telling you. Take advantage. I usually try to start off each 6 weeks with a few decently easy grades early on. That's to help you. That's to help pad your grades a little bit. If you get zeros on all the easy stuff, well, it's less likely you're going to do well on the hard stuff. So, man, turn in your work, show me some effort, let me help you out. Let me see if I got anybody else that has shown up in my little online. I don't think so. So let's go ahead and get started. Industrial Revolution, it's something you probably already know a decent amount about. So to kind of have you activate some prior knowledge, I would like it if in your notebook, you went ahead and made a little circle map. If you write Industrial Revolution in the middle circle, and then for the next minute or so, I just want you to brainstorm everything that comes to your thoughts. Words, pictures, it's whatever, but whatever comes to your mind when you hear Industrial Revolution, I just want you to jot it down real quick. This will be kind of what I'm going to look for to start with when I check your notebook for your Industrial Revolution notes. So give me 1 minute, brainstorm. I'm going to ask you guys to share a little bit. So have some ideas. Give you about 10 more seconds. Again, if you just share a word or an idea or something like that, I think we can all kind of start to get ready for what we're going to be talking about. All right. Who can tell me just one thing? Just anything that comes to your mind. It could be a single word. It could be whatever. Draven, what do you got?
Child labor.
Child labor. Yeah. How old do you guys have to be to get a job nowadays?
16.
16. Yeah, I think it's 16 most places. I started working at 15. There are some jobs, I think still, that you can get a little bit early. I worked at Six Flags. That was my first job. And it sounds really cool, and it kind of was. I got to get in for free. But I don't really like roller coasters, so it didn't help me that much. I got to get some of my friends in for free, and that was cool. But most jobs to this day, yeah, it's usually 16. Guys, we have child labor laws nowadays where you can only work, until you are legally an adult, X amount of hours a day or a week. And there are certain sort of activities you cannot engage in because maybe they're considered too dangerous. There's minimum wage laws. You go to work and there's a fire. Oh my God, there's a fire extinguisher. There's an exit sign. There's fire alarms. Because all those things that we take for granted, they didn't exist back then. You could send a 4 or 5-year-old into a factory. Sometimes they did because their hands are so small. They could get into the little gears and clear different jams that maybe they had. And if their finger got chopped off, hey, it's all in a day's work. Again, as cruel as that sounds, that's reality. Kids were exploited a lot during this time period, have been throughout history, but a lot during this time period. One of the reasons we have child labor laws today and different safety regulations, guys, is because of the unforeseen consequences of some of the stuff that happened in the Industrial Revolution. So child labor, for sure, that is definitely worth knowing. We're going to talk about that. Might even read some documents over it. I'm still deciding. What else? What else you got other than kids getting exploited? Technology. It's all about technology. This is the time period in which a lot of inventions come out of, but in general, you start to see machinery be used to do a lot of the work that people used to do by hand. You look at the world today, and you look at especially how things are made in factories, and they're mass produced. That's something relatively new in the grand scheme of things. I mean, that's, the last 250 years-ish. For most of history, if you own something, you either made it by hand or you bought it in your local community in which it was made by hand for your common person. This is the time period when all that changes. And again, a lot of it's having to do with technology. What else? Come on. Give me one or two more. Right here.
Urbanization.
Okay, stand a little bit louder.
Urbanization.
Urbanization. Everybody know what urbanization is? Maybe so, maybe not. Urban cities. So it's the growth of cities. Guys, most of these new products were made in factories. And this is the time period, most of human history, people live in rural areas. This is the time period that changes. More people start migrating to your urban areas because that's where a lot of those factory jobs are. And urbanization is still something we contend with to this day. That's a trend that starts during this time period and never really stops. Any other ideas? Draven, give me one more, man. I saw that hand kind of creep up.
Assembly line.
Assembly line, yeah. You think about the assembly line and the division of labor and the idea that it's more efficient instead of one person creating every component of a product and creating a finished product. Maybe it's more efficient if everybody has one singular job. If you're, on an automobile assembly line, maybe your only job is putting the lug nuts in the wheels. Okay, and because you do that and somebody else is hanging the doors and somebody else is putting this on and that on, things can flow a lot more efficiently, especially when you've got the use of an assembly line. Guys, all that stuff, it didn't exist before. Okay, and in the grand scheme of things, you're talking like the last 250 years roughly. Industrial Revolution. Okay, the dates you probably need to know, 1750 to 1900 roughly, This is going on at the same time as the political revolutions we've been talking about. It's all going on concurrently. And certainly industrialization and, improved weapon technology and stuff like that does go hand in hand with people rebelling. But the Industrial Revolution, guys, it changes everything in world history. And I really love this time period because, everything else that we've talked about thus far, it's a little abstract. It's like, man, that was so long ago. But during this time period, and we're still kind of living in the Industrial Revolution, you start to see the connective tissue. You start to see the strings that lead to where we are today a little bit more than what we've done thus far. The Industrial Revolution leads to a new wave of empire building, which leads to World War I, which leads to World War II, which essentially creates the world we live in today. Man, this is something that you got to really know about. Think about it like this, and I know it's like, who cares? Factories. No, it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. Think about it from this perspective. Okay, I want you to think about everything that we've studied thus far in this class, going back to the Neolithic Revolution, 10,000 years ago, all the way to maybe, 500 years ago, 1500, Age of Exploration. Think about what we've studied. Think about like movies you've seen, movies, set in historical time periods in the past. Think about the world 500 years ago. Then think about the world, 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Life doesn't look all that different in all those time periods. The world 500 years ago and the world 1,000 years ago, there's differences. Don't get me wrong. There's constant improvements, but not like we've seen over the last 250 years. Everything changes. There's been more change technologically in human history over the last 250, 300 years than we see in the rest of human history combined. That is pretty amazing. That's the Industrial Revolution. This is how we get to where we are today. Let's look at the pictures real fast, because these are some of the things that you guys pointed out. Not all of them, but some of the things. You look in the upper left-hand corner, man, pollution. This is when we really start to dedicate ourselves to the burning of fossil fuels. First coal, later oil. These help industrial production. A lot of people make a lot of money off of them, but unfortunately, they also are contributing to the destruction of our natural environment. You're right, man. Cities, urbanizations, they grow by leaps and bounds. More and more people start moving to cities during this time period in search of jobs, especially, as we'll explain, as agricultural jobs are not as plentiful during this time period. There's reasons why technology has to do with it. We start to see these huge factories spring up. And in these factories, operating a lot of this machinery, it's largely low skill level. And you see a lot of people, unfortunately, that were not seen equally at the time, women and children being exploited, being paid poorly, being forced into situations that are very dangerous. Again, things will have to change due to some of the problems created. You've got mass production of goods, more stuff available than ever before. You got to have ways to get those goods out to the masses. So you see a lot of improvements in transportation as well. You got the train, you got the steamship, you've got all these different innovations that kind of trace themselves back to the Industrial Revolution. I'm telling you, it is all connected. It may not seem so yet, but it really is. So to kind of help introduce this topic, we're going to watch a short video. It's actually a song, which I admit, a little bit cheesy, but it's not a bad song as far as educational songs go. And it's a rap all about the Industrial Revolution. Believe it or not, in this song, they introduce a lot of the stuff that you absolutely need to know. So if you want, you can add a little bit to your bubble map. That's up to you. It's more of a preview of things we're going to go more in depth on. But it's definitely worth checking out. It's got a catchy tune. And again, it'll hopefully preview some of the stuff that you may not really even be thinking about at this point as being connected to industrialization. Kids at home may have to mess with the sound and stuff, so you probably won't be able to hear anything for a little bit. The song is in Canvas if you want to listen to it on your own, and then come back to this. All right. I know, you're super excited. Somebody tells you educational song, it's like, man, can't wait. It's pretty good. Like I said, take it for what it's worth, and just know a lot of the things that they mention, you do need to know.
All right, now look, it's the 18th century, and things just haven't changed much. What? Listen to this real quick. With so many problems in the world today, it's kind of hard, F-A-R-M-A, okay? No time to play sports or sit back. No time to watch shows or spit raps. When farm technology improved, farmland gave us more food. Cool. What should we do with this extra food? Let's make babies and eat it too with the spoon. So the population boom, doubling in Europe and then doubling again soon. With more kids, we need more clothes. We can't stitch those by hand. Oh no, I'm gonna build with machines that sew. Textile industry is booming, yo. James Watt had a dream. These machines will work better on steam. So we've seen more steam, more coal, more slums, more smoke, less time, less space. Like this, less slow, more middle class, more time for living, more links. And I don't mean to complicate, babe. Whoa, I'm sending out an SOS. I can't help myself. I got a brand new Morse code. Telegraphs like sending a text. So wait by to the Pony Express. We text the industrial tree, how I moves from my times to machine. Combustion, electricity, and steam. A new socio-economic regime. We text the industrial tree, how I moves from my times to machines. Combustion, electricity, and steam. A new socio-economic regime. Oh hey, come and work in my factory. You could be any age. Yeah, exactly. You could be a girl too, that's okay. As long as you don't mind all work and no breaks. Pays cheap, you'll be packing meat, sitting in a seat, you'll get beat. If you ever fall asleep, you're in pain, of course, you're in labor. Pack your own lunch, we're not catered. Slip up, and I hope you rock God's mess around, and you could get a finger chopped off. This is how the other half lives in a crib-sized crib full of dirty little kids. In slums, tenements, it's evident, nothing sweet for the poor, but no intimates. The city's big now, and it's filthy. You're a victim of the system, feel me? This free enterprise got my money on the rise, got my pockets full of green faces. Face it, I like to buy Adam Smith and drink. Capitalism's sweet, I don't know what y'all think. Y'all like good communism? Ooh, I don't think so. I wanna be a fat cat sitting in a mid-coat. You want us all pay the same Karl Marx? Make the lead actors the same as the smallpox? Forget that, I'm riding these trains. If you're poor on the tracks, better get out my way. For real, son, move, run, you're on blast. It's the Industrial Revolution. We text the industrial tree, how I moves from my times to machines. Combustion, electricity, and steam. A new socio-economic regime. We text the industrial tree, how I moves from my times to machines. Combustion, electricity, and steam. A new socio-economic regime.
I know, it was that awesome. Good stuff. Give me 1 second here, get my audio switched back over, get these kids online back in the loop. All right, so yeah, educational songs, it is what it is. But I like that one because it does preview a lot of things you may not automatically think about. I mean, you think about even economic systems, capitalism versus socialism and communism. Guys, that all comes out of this time period. Some people benefit a lot from industrialization. Some people get exploited. You're going to see competing ideologies that are going to kind of emerge based on some of the issues that come out of this. So I'm telling you, Industrial Revolution, it connects to almost everything else that we're going to talk about in some way, shape, or form. So pay attention, take some good notes, and yeah, let's see how this whole thing started. Got a picture up here, and it's one that I've shown you before. It's a big issue, very similar to the Industrial Revolution. It really transforms world history. Can anybody tell me what this picture represents? Say it loud. Okay, triangular trade, yes, but we need to pinpoint a little bit more. This actually kind of predates triangular trade, but you're in the right ballpark. You definitely are.
Colonial exchange.
Columbian Exchange. Believe it or not, very good. Very good for both of you. Our conversation with industrialization starts with the Columbian Exchange. It very much connects to it. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. There's not a whole lot of dates I ask you to remember, but 1492 is one of them. Columbus, very divisive figure nowadays, very controversial. We're not talking about him because he was some hero or something like that, but what he did, I'm telling you, it changes history forever. We could debate whether that's for the good or for the bad, but it changes everything because literally, it's two worlds colliding. And we know the deal. Europeans start coming over and they colonize the New World. And we kind of talked about how that leads to later political revolutions and the slave trade and all that crazy stuff. But what we're talking about here in reference to the Columbian Exchange mainly has to do with agriculture. One of the big things that's going on during this time period, 1500s onwards, is the exchange, the biological exchange of all sorts of plants and animals. Okay? Coming from the New World, from the Americas to the Old, to places like Europe especially, you've got a lot of really healthy foods. You've got some healthy, nutrient-rich foods, which are relatively easy to grow. Can grow in a variety of environments, potatoes being a good example. Well, with all this influx, and we've talked about this before, but with all this influx of all these new foods into Europe especially, well, now all of a sudden, you got more food, you're going to end up with more people. And when you get more people, you need more food. And this cycle just keeps going. But believe it or not, that cycle does contribute to industrialization. So let's look at this real quick. The second agricultural, revolution takes place during this time period. The first agricultural revolution going back to the Neolithic Revolution. But this is essentially how it flows. And again, it starts with the Columbian Exchange. 1492 on, you start to see food supplies increase in Europe. As food supplies increase, the population naturally grows. Thing is, when you got population growth because of food, now you got more people, now you need more food. Hey, one of you guys at home, will you turn your mics off? If you got a question, though, let me know. So demand for food rises up. Well, now you got to figure out ways to produce more food, and that just lends itself to technological developments. We do start to see some farming improvements during this time period as European populations just need more food. And because technology is created to improve farming, make it more productive, make it a little bit easier, all of a sudden you don't need as many actual farmers. This leads to more and more people moving to the cities, which in turn eventually leads to you having a ready and willing workforce when industrialization really goes into full swing. Again, second agricultural revolution, sometimes this is called. It's a period in the early 1700s which saw a massive and rapid increase in agricultural productivity and vast improvements in farming techniques. You've got new systems of crop rotation, which allow the soil in various areas to kind of regain their fertility, making them more productive. You see technological innovations, the seed drill being a good example, an actual device that farmers would use to dig down into the earth and plant seeds at a pre-described depth. That way everything is uniform, giving you a much better chance of a better crop yield. There's improved plows invented during this time period that help to till the soil, to help make it more productive. Essentially, farming gets a little bit better, a little bit easier. Eventually, it gets mechanized. And that's kind of the irony of things. You look at the world today. Got a larger human population than ever. Got a larger population in America than ever. We need more food than ever. How many of you guys know a lot of farmers? How many of you guys know any farmers? I don't know any farmers, and I'm old. Probably only met a handful in my life. Today, I read relatively recently, about 2% of the American population work in agriculture. It's not that we don't need more food, we need more food than ever, but so much of it has become mechanized. The machines do so much of the work that people used to do, that actual farmers are less necessary than they once were. Well, that trend starts all the way back then. And this trend starts largely in Europe, specifically Great Britain. The British are going to come up a lot today. You got some technological developments that kind of lead to not as many farmers being absolutely necessary, but you also have some political developments that lead to farming being less of an option for a lot of Europeans, especially in England. A lot of that has to do with something called the enclosure movement, which is just the sort of weird bit of academic vocabulary that if you brought up on an essay or something and explained, that'd be something you could account for evidence points. Throughout England's history, this is just real brief, English towns had traditionally allowed farmers to cultivate land or tend sheep on government property known as the commons. The government technically owned the land, but people could use the land, to help them survive, to help them make a living. But as time progressed, especially as we get into the 1700s, there's much more of a stress on private property ownership. And this leads to what is known as the enclosure movement. This custom of allowing people to work on the commons ended with the enclosure movement, as the government fenced off the commons in order to give exclusive use of it to people who paid for the privilege or who purchased the land. People start fencing off their land. You'll see similar things elsewhere as well, which means your common average everyday just person has less access to land, has less of an ability to make a living and be able to survive off of planting crops, off of growing their food, off of selling the surplus, and off of just eating what they grow. So now all of a sudden, due to politics, due to technology, a large number of farmers is no longer as necessary, and plus it's less of an option for people than it once had been. Many farmers became landless and destitute, forcing them to move from rural to urban areas, a trend we still see to this day, in search of work. This essentially formed the foundation, in England anyway, of a new industrial workforce. So those are some of the preconditions. Let's talk about exactly how it starts and why it starts where it starts. When you think of the Industrial Revolutions, the very early days, the first inkling of industrialization, you need to think Great Britain, 1700s. There's a lot of different reasons it starts there rather than other places. Got a decent definition of the Industrial Revolution here that if you're still kind of like, well, what was this really all about? Again, you don't have to have it down word for word, but this gives you a sense of kind of the scope of it. This period, Industrial Revolution, usually we say the 1700s to the early 1900s. It is a period characterized, by an increase in production of goods brought about by the use of machines, process known as mechanization, and new energy sources, coal, burning coal to create steam. Later, oil. This is when we really start to utilize fossil fuels, which, results in some good, some bad. The big thing early on, though, is just how goods are produced. Traditionally, in human history, most products are produced essentially in cottage industries. They're made in small workshops, they're made at home. Sometimes it's called the putting out system, but things are generally handmade. This is the time period where we shift more to mass production. Like we talked about earlier, people, creating just numerous amounts of identical goods very quickly, very efficiently, using machines, using assembly lines. Essentially, there's more goods available than there have ever been before in human history. Again, for most of history, people don't have. Your average person doesn't own a whole lot. They just don't. Because the things that they have, they either have to make themselves, they have to buy locally in their community, and some of those things are more expensive than people would like to spend on. People don't have a whole lot of clothes, they don't have a whole lot of furniture, they don't have a whole lot of stuff in general. They have what they need. Rich people have a bunch of stuff, they have those luxury goods. We've seen that throughout history, but your average everyday person, they just don't have a whole lot. Compare that to the world today. I mean, really just kind of close your eyes and think about like your bedroom or your house and just think about all the crap that's in there. Just stuff that you have that you've accumulated over time. And some people have a lot of stuff, some people have a little. I mean, we're all, different levels of wealth and all that stuff. But just in general, you think about your average person. I mean, they have a bunch of stuff, clothes and trivial goods that they don't absolutely need. That is because of industrialization. Okay, most of world history is not like that. It's really with industrialization that you get this idea of consumerism, that we just constantly are getting stuff. That's not most of human history. That's only the last couple hundred years. And again, it ties directly back to then, because once you can mass produce identical items and you can do it efficiently and quickly and cheaply, it means things in general are more affordable for the masses, and businesses can still make a whole lot of money off it. Again, big shift in lifestyle. But why does it start in Great Britain? Well, I'm going to tell you why. And this is really important to understand. There's all sorts of different factors, environmental and political and just factors in general, technological factors that come together for the British at the right time that lead to the Industrial Revolution starting there rather than somewhere else. From there, it spreads to places that have similar characteristics. Lots of North and Western Europe. Later, the northeastern part of the youthful United States. Then everybody else comes later. And that's something a lot of people fail to understand. Guys, the world didn't undergo this at the same time. It happened at different places at different times. So obviously, the industrial economies that develop in Britain, in Western Europe, in the United States, man, they're going to have more stuff. They're going to have better transportation. They're going to have better technology. They're going to have stronger militaries than everybody else in the world for at least a little while. It's no accident that the United States and countries of Western Europe will become dominant forces over the next 100 years or so. Because again, they've got kind of a leg up on the competition. I think that'll become apparent as we move forward. This is one of the reasons why you see, leading into the 20th century, a lot of those Western European nations, the United States, we're at least becoming some of the more powerful nations in the world. But it all starts with the British. Why does it start there? Well, first, geography, natural resources. Great Britain, or the British Isles, it's an island. It is islands. And in England itself, it's surrounded by water. That means that they have all sorts of different areas that could just form natural ports for shipping. Again, having this island location means that they could ship stuff all over. It's easy to get products, out of their territory and export them to foreign lands that they can make money off of. In addition to having access to the ocean, they've got a lot of rivers, which this is important because early on, before the invention of the steam engine, you pretty much had to be located near a river if you're a factory, because water is what was powering a lot of the machinery. Well, Great Britain had that. Surrounded by water, they got plenty of rivers, they're good. They also had some very important natural resources, which in the early days were absolutely essential to become industrialized. First, Great Britain had a lot of coal, lots of coal. Coal is really the first big fossil fuel that leads to industrialization. That's what fuels the steam engines. That's what fuels, the machinery. That thick black smoke you see in the photos of some of those early industrial cities, guys, that's coal burning. It is a great resource, for powering industry. It is also a heavy pollutant. So again, our trend towards, kind of damaging our environment, this is when it really gets in full swing. In addition to coal, Great Britain had a lot of iron ore. Iron ore to build bridges and buildings and factories and machines. Later on, iron contributes to steel production, which kind of replaces iron in a lot of respects. But just having those resources and having the access to water, another important resource, I mean, it's one of the reasons that the British, kind of start this earlier than everybody else. And you will notice the other areas that become industrialized later, they share a lot of these common characteristics. The East Coast of the United States, lots of coal, lots of access to water, some iron ore. You see a lot of Western Europe as well kind of meet those characteristics too. But that is not all. They got some other stuff going for them, and some of it traces back to their history of colonization. In the mid-1700s, they've still got the 13 colonies. They've got land in India that they're starting to gain more and more control of. Great Britain, along with the Spanish and the French and the Portuguese and the Dutch, those were your original colonial powers. And we know because of mercantilism, the colonies made these countries a lot of money. Now, Great Britain was about to go through some problems, with the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution. But at the beginning of all this, they're doing pretty good. Meaning the country and some of the wealthy within that country of Britain had money to invest in new ideas, in new businesses, in building factories, in building machines. Again, a lot of that comes from New World colonies. A lot of that, wealth comes from, colonialism. And what we talked about earlier, triangular trade, the slave trade, all that stuff contributed to the British having the wealth necessary to start this. With colonies, around the world, especially in the New World, they had a large fleet of ships already to get those products all around. They also had, as we talked about earlier, a history of private property ownership, joint stock companies, banking systems, all needed to kind of fund industrial production. Great Britain, like a lot of the rest of Europe, was undergoing population growth. They already had people moving into the cities, so they had a workforce ready and waiting to kind of fill those factory jobs in the cities. And because the jobs were plentiful and because there were so many people fighting for those jobs, they didn't have to pay the workers a whole lot, which is going to lead to more profit for the business owners, which is in turn going to lead to a further growth of industrialization. Essentially, the British had everything they needed. They had the factors of production. They had the land, they had the labor, they had the capital for investment. They also had a lot of the ideas. There were certain innovations that kind of spurred everything else. And all it would take is one sort of, I guess you could say, industry, one sort of work production to kind of lead the way. The earliest sort of industry that becomes, mechanized, that becomes industrialized, was the textile industry. That is important to note, the textile industry. Anybody know what textiles are? Kind of a weird word. It's essentially cloth production at the end of the day. Producing yarn, producing cloth, ultimately using that cloth to produce clothing, kind of all falls under the textile industry. Kind of makes sense, though, that would be one of the first, industries to become more mechanized, to be more efficient, using machinery. I mean, if you think about it, you've got this mass population growth. You've got a need there of more clothing. It could be very profitable. People could do it more efficiently. So a lot of the first machines and a lot of the first factories were really kind of organized around the textile industry. A couple examples. You got the flying shuttle invented by John Kay, 1733. You got the spinning jenny, really famous, invented by James Hargreaves, 1764. I believe that's the spinning jenny pictured there. You've got the water frame by Richard Arkwright, 1769, who, was kind of the founder of what we consider to be the modern factory. Because you can now make textiles a lot more efficiently and a lot cheaper, well, now textiles were more plentiful, and people started to see huge profit in this. And if you housed a bunch of these machines together, that could be even more efficient for, as we'd say, mass production. So you start to see factories initially located near rivers because the flow of the river was used to power the machinery, but also having the rivers there, it's nasty, but you could dispose of a lot of your waste. You also had a transportation corridor. You could ship some of your goods out, you could get some of your raw materials in. Now that'll start to change with a little bit more invention, especially the invention of the steam engine, which we're going to talk about next. Well, actually, no, steam engine's not yet. Sorry, that's a future slide. Let's talk about some other inventions even before that, though. Couple come from the American inventor Eli Whitney, who you probably learned about in 8th grade, famed for inventing the cotton gin, which was a simple machine that would help clean the seeds and the husks out of cotton. Before the cotton gin, it was, cotton was pretty expensive. It was a very painstaking process to get the seeds and the husks out. It was terrible. But once you had the cotton gin, cotton gets even more valuable as a cash crop. Which has the unfortunate consequence, of actually extending the importance of American slavery in the South. This is the time period when, cotton really becomes a huge cash crop in the American South. Because it's labor intensive, slavery expands because of that. So the cotton gin's kind of, pretty messed up in its effects. But arguably more important than the cotton gin is the concept, the system of interchangeable parts that Whitney comes up with. Guys, before interchangeable parts in these early days of machinery, every machine was relatively unique. It had its own specially designed parts, and you had to have your own specially designed tools to work on that specially designed machine. And essentially, if one of these machines broke down, you had to have, somebody very skilled, a craftsman of sort, come in to fix that machine, to work on that machine. Perhaps fabricate a brand new part just for that machine. Eli Whitney's the guy that started the process of standardization. Standardized nuts and bolts and screws and springs and gears. That if one machine breaks down, you've got spare parts. You can pop that in there. You can take it off of another machine. You can have the same sort of tools that will work on all these machines. It's really once you start to see that standardization, interchangeable parts, that this becomes more economical, that we can build these identical machines and they're relatively easy to work on, and it's going to be more efficient for everybody, more profitable for everybody. Really, that's the foundation of later on, having those assembly lines in factories, having the division of labor where rather than have each worker, completely produce a finished product, maybe they focus on just one thing alone. Again, much more efficient, definitely, helps contribute to the industrial economy growing, mass production in general. Now we're going to talk about the steam engine, and we're almost done. We got maybe 2 slides after this. The steam engine's a big game changer. Again, before the steam engine, you essentially had to have your factory near a river. That way the flow of the river powered the machines. But James Watt comes up with the steam engine, where you could burn coal to create steam that would generate energy for mechanical devices. You don't think a whole lot about steam engines nowadays, but guys, it's still steam engines essentially that burn coal, that produce a lot of the electricity that we have in the United States. I mean, some of it is, produced using water, hydroelectricity, but most of it's still produced essentially using steam engines. Coal burning is something we don't think about, but it still goes on all the time. The key is once you've got the steam engine, well, now you don't necessarily have to have your factory located right by a river. Now you have, more versatility. Steam engine's a big deal. To this day, you think watt, energy, electricity is measured in watts. This is why. 2 more slides. I'm going to go through them kind of fast, but it's not that bad. Once you get the steam engine, you can power your machinery, pretty much anywhere. But now you also have the ability to translate that sort of technology to transportation as well. Because if you're going to be mass producing goods, you got to be able to get these goods out to the masses and markets across the world. By water, you get from the steam engine the Steamboat by Robert Fulton. And because steamboats and maritime transportation, transporting these goods, via globalized trade gets more and more abundant, You got to see these different places, build up their infrastructure, building canals. We see a wave of canal building in the 18 and early 1900s. The Erie Canal in 1825, the Suez Canal in 1869, the Panama Canal, pretty interesting story, in 1914. Because transportation is so much more important, you start to see building up further of infrastructure by land. This is when you start to see the spread of true paved roads, more well-maintained roads. Again, you got to be able to get your products from here to there. But one of the most impactful inventions that deals with transportation got to be the railroad. Railroads, you start to see the first steam-driven locomotive developed in 1804, first railroad line laid in 1821. Key thing, in addition to, shipping goods and bringing in natural resources, guys, railroads help to expand and control territory. You think about the United States, and very early on, there was this concept that was used to kind of justify our expansion, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the West Coast, called Manifest Destiny. That wasn't really fully realized until you have the Transcontinental Railroad connecting East Coast to West Coast in 1869. Before that, the West was the Wild West. The big cities and the stable governments were in the East, where we had kind of originated. The West was wild. It was untamed. It was the frontier. But once we connected our territory, well, it was a lot easier to connect, our nation. And one of the things that you're going to find, later on, when we get into our next wave of empire building, which, believe it or not, is inspired by industrialization, you start to see one of the first things that people do when they conquer a foreign land, they build a railroad to get resources out, to get products and soldiers in. We're going to stop there today because we only got 2 minutes left anyway, and this is actually where I wanted to get to. On Monday, we're going to get into just kind of the dramatic changes that all this industrialization brings to society and just culture in general. Like I said, throughout next week, we'll be working in this PowerPoint, but we're going to break it up a little bit. It shouldn't be just lecture every day. We've got a couple other things that I'm thinking about doing. Next Friday, we do have our first notebook check of the 6 weeks. These PowerPoint notes are going to be one of the last things in it. We may add a little bit, but definitely the PowerPoint notes are going to be important. Other than that, just a reminder, there are some things at this point which are past due. So check the grade book, see where you're at. If you owe me stuff, please get it to me. Again, the things that we've had thus far, really not that bad. You don't want to get zeros on them, so please get those done. Other than that, we'll come to a stopping point. Online kiddos, y'all have a good day.